Hello, and thanks for stopping by. Today, I'm in the quiet village of Kelvedon Hatch, which is nestled out in the Essex countryside, just over 20 miles from central London and a few miles south of Chipping Ongar, which until 1994 marked the easternmost point of the Central Line. There's been a settlement here for at least 1,000 years, as evidenced by the fact that Kelvedon Hatch appears in the Domesday Book, although back then it was known as Kelvdon. In the mid to late 20th century though, the term Doomsday secretly took on a different meaning altogether here, as hinted at by this communications tower, which looms over the northern outskirts of the village. Let's go and take a closer look. Near the tower, and branching off the A128 Ongar Road, you'll find this long country track, which leads down to what appears to be a secluded bungalow. This isn't some cosy farm residence though. This structure was in fact built by the government to serve two specific purposes. Firstly, as a disguise, for although it isn't a bungalow, it was indeed designed to make anyone straying too close to think it was one. Secondly, it acted as a military guardhouse, for this unassuming building conceals the entrance to something very sensitive indeed. A huge 3-storey nuclear bunker. Had a nuclear Third World War broken out during the Cold War era, it would have been from this covert site that London, or whatever remained of it, would have been governed by a staff of around 600 people. Back then, at any time from the 1950s to the 1980s, wandering around here like this may well have gotten me into a lot of trouble. But as I'm sure you've guessed, this once top secret site has since been declassified. In fact, it's now open to the public as a museum. In this video then, I'd like to show you around the Kelvedon Hatch bunker, and as we go along, I'll tell you all about its history and point out the various Cold War curiosities which lie within. Although be warned, this is a very eerie place indeed. Using structures like this bungalow as camouflage wasn't uncommon during the Cold War. Across the vast plains of the American Midwest, for example, similar farm-like buildings were sometimes used to hide parts of nuclear missile silos. And in the UK, Kelvedon Hatch wasn't the only bunker disguised as a bungalow. You can see similar dummy houses covering bunkers at Barborough in Norfolk, Shipton in North Yorkshire, and Anstruther on the east coast of Scotland. Despite the subterfuge though, the Kelvedon Hatch bunker was still surrounded by a security fence, which you can briefly see in the 1980 Panorama documentary When the Bomb Drops, in which Jeremy Paxman says,
"There are 2 guards stationed permanently outside an innocuous bungalow in the home counties, a building so secret we cannot show it."
Despite this, the bungalow is shown in the 1962 government film The Hole in the Ground, which details the work of the Royal Observer Corps, more of which later. Upon stepping through the fake bungalow's door, it's clear we're entering a very different world indeed. The guardhouse leads directly to the bunker's entrance tunnel, which at 120 yards, or 360 feet long, is both impressive and intimidating, with the temperature quickly becoming noticeably cooler. You can see this tunnel in both of the films I mentioned a moment ago. The passageway, which as you can see here, is kitted out with fold-down beds, which were most likely used by those on guard duty, leads deep into the hill, and the lowest level of the 3-storey bunker, a point some 125 feet, or 38 metres below the ground. The main part of the nuclear fortress itself is accessed via these 2 hefty blast doors, which are forged from tank metal and weigh in at 1.5 tons each. A particular design aspect of the passage are the two dog legs which appear at either end, twists in the tunnel which are incorporated to help deflect the impact of any nuclear blast. In addition to reaching far below the surface, the length of this tunnel has an added bonus feature. From a strategic point of view, it would have helped defend the bunker had any desperate outsiders attempted to force their way in. The Kelvedon hatch bunker can trace its history back to the early 1950s. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonated their first atomic bomb, prompting the British government to urgently reassess the nation's air defences. In those days, it was expected that, in the event of an atomic war, the Soviets would deliver such weapons via long-range bombers, in a manner similar to the devastating attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. And so, to counter this threat, Britain began developing a network of advanced radar stations, codenamed ROTOR. Kelvdon Hatch was a major aspect of this scheme, built to serve as the operations centre for the RAF's Metropolitan Sector of Fighter Command, which was tasked with defending London. In order to construct the bunker, the government, under threat of compulsory purchase, acquired 25 acres of farmland from the Parish family, who still own the land, and now the bunker as well, today. With a military guard standing watch, an almighty crater was then excavated, into which the 3-level bunker was built. The structure sits on a strong gravel base, designed to act as a shock absorber if rocked by a nuclear blast, and is surrounded by a 10-foot thick concrete wall, which in turn is surrounded by a further layer of brick. The bunker's walls are also surrounded by a wire mesh, known as a Faraday cage, which was incorporated to combat EMP, electromagnetic pulse, an intense burst of energy which accompanies a nuclear explosion, the effects of which can frazzle any electrical equipment beyond repair. Construction was swift, and once built, the land was heaped back on top, thus concealing the shelter. The Parish family were permitted to continue farming up top as normal, but as you can imagine, they certainly weren't privy to what went on in the depths below. As cover for the mysterious project, residents in the nearby village of Kelvedon Hatch were told that an underground reservoir was being built, although it didn't take folk too long to work out what was really going on. The Kelvedon Hatch bunker became operational in 1953, and in its initial role as a fighter command centre, its interior was rather different than as it appears today. As this photograph of a ROTOR bunker shows, the central area would have been based around an open well, circled by 3 balconies, all looking down on a large map, upon which the movements of aircraft could be plotted, essentially a souped-up version of a World War II operations room. The world, however, was quickly changing. In 1952, the USA tested their first hydrogen bomb, a terrifying weapon many more times powerful than a basic atomic bomb, with the Soviets following suit soon after. Furthermore, jet aircraft and intercontinental ballistic missiles were also being developed, and the astonishing speed of such technology soon rendered the RAF's rotor radar redundant. As the Cold War progressed, however, it transpired that Kelvedon Hatch would still have a crucial role to play. Once nuclear missiles entered the game, it became clear that, in the event of a Third World War, London, and with it the heart of government, would be completely annihilated. To ensure the nation could continue to function in such an emergency, therefore, plans were drawn up which sought to disperse power around the country. If an international crisis threatened to spiral out of control and erupt into a nuclear war, then the United Kingdom was to be divided into a series of regions, each of which would essentially form their own mini-government, overseen from a designated bunker. Region 2, for example, was North East England, Region 7 the South West, and Region 8 was Wales. London was designated as Region 5, and Kelvedon Hatch, hopefully being somewhat safer tucked away deep in the Essex countryside, was to serve as its headquarters. In preparation for this new role, the bunker was remodelled, the main change being that the large well in the middle was floored over, thus allowing for more desk space. Now, rather than RAF personnel plotting aircraft movements, Kelvedon Hatch began to accommodate groups of civil servants who'd come here to partake in regular wargame exercises, in which the horrors of a nuclear holocaust would be role-played and assessed. Those involved in such training exercises had to make unthinkable decisions, such as how much food survivors should be fed, if at all, what was to be done with looters, firing squads being the ultimate option, and what was the most efficient way to dispose of the countless corpses. You can see a good example of one such game in the 1980 Panorama documentary, which was filmed at a bunker near Hull.
But these, as far as the ordinary people are concerned, it's very... Oh my God. Well, it's academic.
Is that Ghoul District? Have you got a bearing on the bomb that's dropped near Hull? You have?
Had a nuclear attack been launched against Britain, there was of course very little civilians above ground could have done to shield themselves. All they would have had to go on, in fact, was a simple information campaign called Protect and Survive, which was drawn up by the government in the mid-1970s. Numerous references to it appear throughout the Kelvedon Hatch bunker. Protect and Survive consisted of 20 short animated films which would have been broadcast on a continuous loop on television in the 72 hours or so before an expected attack.
If we are attacked by nuclear weapons, these are the warning sounds you must recognize. First, the attack warning.
The shorts, which were voiced by Patrick Allen and produced by Richard Taylor Cartoons, the same team who made the far more jolly Crystal Tips and Alistair, are deeply unnerving. Their atmosphere not helped by the creepy electronic jingle which appears at the end of each segment. In the tense prelude to war, a copy of the accompanying Protect and Survive booklet was also set to be posted to every household, although when this pamphlet was made public in 1980, the advice offered was subjected to great ridicule. After all, constructing a makeshift shelter out of a set of lean-to doors, as demonstrated here in the Kelvedon Hatch bunker, isn't really going to help against nuclear blast or fallout, is it? As for warning the public of any incoming attack, the UK relied upon a network known as HANDEL, which was in use between 1962 and 1992. HANDEL involved thousands of little receiver boxes being installed at all manner of sites across the country, everywhere from bunkers and police stations, to hospitals, industrial units, post offices, and even pubs. These units ran on the same network as the talking clock, and in peacetime would tick away like an electronic metronome, 24/7, a sound you can hear replicated throughout the Kelvedon Hatch bunker. Had the unit ever emitted a disturbing warbling alarm, followed by the words "Attack Warning Red" though, well, that meant you were in trouble. Upon hearing the dreaded warning, those custodians of such devices in rural areas, like postmasters and pub landlords, were expected to grab a handheld siren and crank it up, warning the local community that a barrage of Soviet nuclear missiles was inbound. In more urban areas, larger air raid sirens, such as this pair on display in the bunker, were fitted to the roofs of police stations, or on poles in the street, an example of which you can see outside the bunker. These larger sirens were controlled by units in major police stations, two examples of which can be seen at Kelvedon Hatch, complete with red war telephones. There were several occasions throughout the Cold War when, rather chillingly, such sirens were set off by accident, one of the most notable occurring one morning in Coventry in February 1984. Not the sort of thing you'd want to wake up to. Once it was designated as a regional seat of government in the 1960s, Kelvedon Hatch Bunker, like its counterparts in other parts of the UK, was kitted out with an impressive BBC radio studio. This studio would have been used in line with the Wartime Broadcasting Service, a system which, in the lead up to war, would have become the one and only channel, with all other TV and radio stations going off air. The Wartime Broadcasting Service, along with the national network of sirens, would have been responsible for transmitting the so-called 4-minute warning, an ominous pre-recorded message which, in all honesty, would have been the last thing millions of people ever heard. By the 1980s, the official wording for this radio warning consisted of 3 stark sentences. Here is an emergency announcement. An air attack is approaching this country. Go to shelter or take cover immediately. This phrase was to be repeated 12 times, and no doubt would have been punctuated by an alarm tone of some sort. After an attack, it was from this studio that the bunker's main controller would have broadcast to whoever was alive in the London region, primarily issuing fallout warnings and instructions such as where to report for food and reconstruction duties.
I'm speaking from the county's main headquarters at Bourne. This is an official broadcast, and I will be telling you what you must do in the days ahead. Among the many...
As mentioned earlier, the Kelvedon Hatch bunker was designed to accommodate around 600 staff. However, since those assigned the place weren't allowed to bring family members, it's unclear how many would have actually reported for duty when the call came. And even if that many people did turn up, there still wasn't enough space for 600 beds. This meant the stuffy dormitories would have operated on a so-called hot bed system. In other words, you took it in turn to share a bunk, one person on duty, the other in bed, until the time came to swap. The only exception was for the bunker's highest ranking officials, who were lucky enough to be granted their own sparse office and bed. There were 3 such units located along this corridor. The bunker also had a sick bay, shown here, and a number of washrooms, although once the bombs had dropped, water would be strictly rationed, meaning those down here would have to rely on chemical toilets. And, just when you thought it couldn't get any more worse, this good old-fashioned tracing paper style loo roll. During a nuclear war, this bunker wouldn't have been isolated as such. Kelvedon Hatch was at the head of a regional network, with other smaller bunkers in the London area reporting to it, such as Pear Tree House near Crystal Palace, which I've covered in a previous video. I'll link that below in case you haven't yet seen it. There were also hundreds of tiny bunkers spread across Britain, which were staffed by the Royal Observer Corps, a group of volunteers tasked with measuring the size of nearby explosions and the subsequent patterns of fallout, which they'd report up the chain. The equipment shown here would have been used in a Royal Observer Corps bunker. The yellow sticks, for example, are maroons, which were to be fired as a means of warning survivors of any approaching radioactive fallout.
When fallout is expected, you will hear 3 bangs in short succession. They will be sounded by means of maroons like this.
A model of a Royal Observer Corps post is also on display here. Would you fancy spending 3 weeks in such a cramped space? Thankfully, of course, none of the facilities or preparations we've seen at Kelvedon Hatch were ever employed for real. Although, given the current state of the world, who knows what plans today's governments are now putting in place. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this tour of the Kelvdon hatch bunker interesting, and as always, I'd be fascinated to hear your own thoughts. Have you visited this or any similar bunker yourself? And how do you think you would have reacted had you ever heard the dreaded 4-minute warning? Please be sure to let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet subscribed to Rob's London, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, would ensure that you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.